I never expected a single sentence from my dad to alter the quiet rhythm of my life. But when he said he had a surprise that would change our family forever, something in his tone carved a cold space in my chest. My name is Carver Hayes, and at 22, I've learned to live with silence, my own, my father's, and the kind that fills a house when two people pretend everything is fine. After my parents divorced 3 years ago, Dad and I tried to build something like normal again, but the emotional cracks between us only widened. Some days I sensed he wanted to talk. Other days, I felt like I was sharing a house with a stranger. Recently, he'd been even quieter, disappearing into phone calls he ended the second I walked into the room. I told myself it wasn't my business, but curiosity tugged at me like a loose thread I couldn't stop pulling. The morning he delivered the news a surprise. He set a plate of pancakes in front of me and cleared his throat twice before speaking. His hands trembled slightly. That alone told me whatever he had planned wasn't small. Dad had always been a steady man, unshakable, practical, the kind of person who measured every emotion before letting it out. Seeing that flicker of uncertainty unsettled me. I asked him what the surprise was, but he just smiled and said I'd know soon enough. That smile felt rehearsed, like he didn't quite believe it himself. I walked outside after breakfast, trying to shake off the unease twisting in my stomach. The air smelled like wet cedar and distant rain, and the quiet neighborhood streets gave me space to think, or try to. That's when I saw him for the first time. A guy kneeling on the sidewalk, gathering groceries that had spilled from a torn paper bag. I hurried over to help. He looked up, and his smile hit me with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. His name was Jensen Cole, tall, sun-kissed skin, dark hair a little messy, and eyes that held an easy confidence I instantly envied. As we collected his things, our fingers brushed. It was nothing, and yet my heart reacted like it was everything. I'd spent years burying my attraction to men, hiding it under quiet routines and the fear of what my dad would say. Jensen didn't know any of that, but something in the way he looked at me made me feel like he saw more than I let on. He thanked me, dusting off a box of cereal as if it mattered more than the awkward electricity still lingering in the air between us. We ended up walking the same direction, without planning it. He'd just moved into the neighborhood, renting a small house across from ours. He talked casually, but I noticed the way he studied me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I didn't mind it. If anything, I found myself wanting him to look longer. It had been years since anyone observed me with genuine curiosity. At home, Dad always seemed lost in his own world, and I'd grown used to shrinking into the background, hoping it made things easier for both of us. Jensen and I parted ways at his driveway, and for a moment I stood there pretending I was simply being polite, not stealing one last glance at him. I walked home with my thoughts tangled in a way they hadn't been in a long time. Attraction was dangerous. It opened doors I'd spent years locking. But something about him kept pulling me in, as if he carried a piece of the story I didn't know I was living yet. Later that afternoon, I found Dad sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of documents with focus so sharp he didn't notice me at first. He quickly closed a folder when he realized I was watching. My stomach tightened again. Whatever he was hiding, it wasn't small. I asked if everything was okay. He gave the same stiff smile and said he was just busy. I didn't push. We weren't the kind of father and son who pushed. Not anymore. By evening, the sky had faded into shades of gray, and I wandered outside to clear my head. Jensen was sitting on his porch, elbows on his knees, watching the street like he was waiting for something. When he noticed me, he raised a hand in a casual wave. I hesitated, then walked over. The conversation flowed easier than I expected. He asked questions, not the superficial kind, but the ones that made me feel seen. I found myself talking about the divorce, about how Dad and I drifted apart, and how the house didn't feel like home anymore. Jensen listened with quiet intensity, nodding slowly, absorbing every word. When the wind swept through the trees and nudged a chill into the air, Jensen leaned back and looked at me with a half-smile. "You ever feel like life is about to shift in a way you can't predict?" he asked. The question startled me. It felt too precise, too aligned with the storm brewing in my own life. I told him Dad had a surprise planned, but I didn't know if it was good or bad. Jensen's expression flickered brief, unreadable, before he returned to that calm, warm smile. He told me maybe the surprise was exactly what I needed, even if I didn't know it yet. Something in his tone hinted at more, like he knew change was coming before I did. It should have made me nervous, but instead it made me curious. Curious about him, about what he wasn't saying, and about why he seemed so interested in my father's plans. When I asked him how long he planned to stay in the neighborhood, he looked away for a moment before answering. "Long enough," he said. Long enough for what? He didn't explain. As the evening settled deeper, we sat in silence, both of us pretending the quiet didn't feel strangely charged. Jensen glanced at me once more, his gaze lingering too long to be accidental. For a second, I wondered if he knew the secret I kept buried, the one about who I was and who I wanted. But he didn't say anything, and I didn't ask. Some things felt too fragile to touch. When I finally stood to leave, Jensen's voice stopped me. "Carver, whatever your dad is planning, be ready." He said it softly, like a warning or maybe a promise. I couldn't tell which. Either way, a chill crawled up my spine. I walked back home with that sentence echoing through me. Dad's surprise. Jensen's strange interest. The shifting air around everything I thought I understood. I didn't know it yet, but the next days would rip open secrets, ignite emotions I wasn't prepared to feel, and push me into the center of a truth that bound all three of us together in ways I never could predict it. And all of it started with a smile on a quiet street, a trembling hand over pancakes, and a surprise waiting like a storm just beyond the horizon. My dad's announcement didn't come gently. It landed in the center of our living room like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples straight through everything I thought I understood about our fractured family. He stood near the window, hands awkwardly folded, as though bracing himself for the reaction he already feared. I sat across from him on the couch, leaning forward, trying to read the tension in his tight jaw. When he cleared his throat, the air felt thinner. "Carver," he said, "I'm getting remarried." Just like that. No lead-up, no soft cushion of context, no warning. A single sentence that cracked open the quiet equilibrium we had just begun to rebuild. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. My thoughts collided like loose stones tumbling down a slope. My dad had barely dated after the divorce. At least, I had never seen it. The idea that he had found someone serious enough to marry felt surreal, almost artificial, like hearing a friend casually confess something absurd. "You're getting remarried?" I finally echoed, unable to disguise the disbelief stretching my voice thin. He nodded once, too quickly, too nervously, and the unease in his eyes told me he expected resistance. Maybe he even deserved it. He had kept this entire relationship concealed from me, and the secrecy stung more than the announcement itself. I asked him to tell me about the man. He hesitated, just long enough to leave a bruise. "His name is Adrian," he said. "Adrian Mercer." He said the name softly, the way someone might handle something delicate or powerful. The syllables hung between us, foreign and heavy. When I asked how long they had been together, he glanced toward the hallway before answering. "A few months." He didn't meet my eyes when he said it. Something inside me tightened. Months. And he was only telling me now. Before I could press further, the front door opened, and a tall man stepped inside as though he already owned a piece of the space. He was sharply dressed, with a smooth composure that felt rehearsed. His gaze flicked me immediately, calculating, observant, almost clinical, yet paired with a smile so polished it reflected back no real warmth. "You must be Carver," he said, extending his hand with practiced charm. "I've heard a lot about you." His voice was warm, but something colder lived behind it, something I couldn't name yet. I shook his hand because politeness felt like the only shield I had. As he sat beside my dad, I observed the way he draped an arm across the back of the couch, a little too possessive, a little too claiming. My dad seemed to shrink in his presence, not physically but emotionally, as if comfort had turned into compliance without him noticing. Adrian's eyes kept returning to me, and each time they did, I felt as though he was peeling away layers, searching for something specific. The intensity unsettled me. I didn't know him, yet he looked at me as if he did. When they excused themselves to step into the kitchen, I stayed back, my mind spinning. I wasn't angry about the idea of my dad finding love again. He deserved companionship after the emptiness of the past few years. But I was angry that he kept it hidden, and that the man he chose left a sour taste in the air. I replayed Adrian's greeting, the stiffness of my dad's posture, the unnatural harmony between their movements. Something didn't align. Later that evening, when I walked outside to clear my head, I found Jensen sitting on the wooden railing of my porch as though he had been waiting for me. He looked up with a small, lopsided smile that tried to ease the tension he must have read on my face. I hadn't realized how much I needed to see him until that moment. The porch light cast soft shadows on his features, cutting through the turmoil spinning inside me. He patted the space beside him, an unspoken invitation I accepted without hesitation. "You look like someone just turned your world upside down," he said gently. I let out a humorless laugh. "My dad's getting remarried." Jensen's eyes widened slightly, though not in surprise, more like recognition. "To who?" he asked too carefully. "A man named Adrian. Adrian Mercer." His reaction was subtle, a small, almost invisible tightening in his jaw, a flicker behind his eyes. But I caught it. It wasn't the expression of someone neutral. It was the expression of someone who knew more than he wanted to say. "You know him?" I asked, leaning forward. Jensen hesitated. He exhaled slowly, looking toward the yard as if searching for the right words among the shadows. "I've heard of him," he said finally, though the carefulness in his voice betrayed a deeper truth. "He's not the kind of man you want your father tying his life to." His tone was soft, but the warning embedded in it was unmistakable. A shiver ran through me, not from a cool air, but from the vast unknown stretching suddenly between what I knew and what Jensen refused to reveal. "Tell me what you mean," I pushed, but Jensen shook his head. "Not yet," he murmured. "I need you to trust me." His reluctance frustrated me, but his concern felt real, and that complicated everything. In the past weeks, he had become a steady presence, quiet but grounding, someone I found myself drawn to without understanding why. Now, the edges of that comfort frayed. He shifted slightly, his shoulder brushing mine, and the contact steadied the storm inside me. In the quiet that followed, he rested his hand on mine, cautiously, as if granting me permission to pull away. I didn't. The simple warmth of his touch broke open a part of me I had kept hidden for so long. "Carver," he whispered, "whatever's happening, you don't have to face it alone." His sincerity reached places inside me I thought were locked away. But before I could respond, before I could lean into the moment that felt dangerously close to something deeper, Jensen withdrew his hand. The loss of contact settled over me like a hollow ache. He studied my face for a long breath before adding, "Just be careful. People aren't always who they pretend to be." The words lingered long after he left, echoing in the dark like a warning carved into stone. When I finally went back inside, my dad and Adrian were laughing softly at the dining table, unaware that a quiet dread had begun to bloom inside me. I watched them from the doorway, seeing something I hadn't noticed before, how my dad leaned toward Adrian as though he depended on him, how Adrian's eyes glinted with a satisfaction that didn't look anything like love. A chill settled under my skin. I didn't know what Jensen was holding back, but I could feel the truth tightening its grip around the edges of my life. Whatever surprise my dad thought he was giving me, whatever future he believed he was stepping into, I sensed now that a darker undercurrent waited beneath the surface. And for the first time since Jensen walked into my life, I realized that the danger wasn't just emotional. It was real. I didn't expect the truth to find me so quickly, nor did I expect it to feel like something sharp being pulled out of my chest. It happened late in the evening, long after the house had settled into an uneasy silence, and long after Dad and Adrian had disappeared into the study for another one of their whispered discussions. I was headed down the hall toward the kitchen when I heard Adrian's voice float from behind a half-closed door. His tone wasn't warm or affectionate like the one he used around Dad. It was more polished, cold, and calculating. Curiosity tugged at me, and before I could stop myself, I stood still and listened. "I told you," Adrian said, his voice low. "Marshall trusts me completely. As soon as everything is signed, the property becomes ours. He won't suspect a thing." I froze. For a moment, I thought I had misheard him, that maybe he meant something else. But the confidence in his tone left no room for misinterpretation. My father who had already lost so much, was about to lose everything again, and the man he loved was the one orchestrating the blow. I felt heat rising under my skin, anger and disbelief churning together. I backed away silently, terrified that if Adrian sensed my presence, he would twist the situation before I understood anything fully. I returned to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, hands trembling. Everything I knew tilted, and the floor felt unsteady. Betrayal wasn't just a distant fear now. It was breathing in our hallway, wearing Adrian's polite smile. My father, blinded by affection, couldn't see the trap tightening around him, but I did. The first person I thought to tell was Jensen. Even though we hadn't known each other long, he had slipped into my life with the quiet steadiness of someone who has already learned how to carry heavy truths. I called him, and he arrived within minutes, as if he had been waiting for me to reach out. When I opened the door, he looked at me with a mixture of worry and determination. "What happened?" he asked, stepping inside without hesitation. I told him everything. Adrian's voice, the words I heard, the fear that my father was about to be taken advantage of. Jensen didn't look surprised. He only looked sad. And that expression scared me more than anything Adrian had said. "There's something I should have told you earlier," Jensen said quietly, lowering himself onto the couch. "I didn't want it until I was sure, but it's time." He explained that he knew Adrian, knew him far more deeply than anyone should. Years ago, Adrian had targeted Jensen's older brother, pretending to be a business partner. He drained his savings, destroyed his reputation, and vanished before the damage could even be fully understood. Jensen's family was left broken and humiliated. Jensen came here because he recognized Adrian's name in a public record and followed him, determined to warn whoever his next target was. He planned to confront him, expose him, or, at the very least, stop him from hurting someone else. But he hadn't expected, not in 1,000 chances, that the person Adrian was targeting would be the father of the first guy Jensen had liked in years. As he spoke, I felt something inside me crack, not because I didn't believe him, but because his silence felt like its own betrayal. Still, I knew his intentions were not evil. They were shaped by grief and fear. But that didn't soften the sting. "You should have told me the moment we met," I whispered, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "You let me trust someone who was already planning to burn my family down." Jensen lowered his gaze. "I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't want to overwhelm you. I didn't know how deep Adrian had gotten with your dad until now." I stepped away from him, unsure where to place my hands or my anger. "You still hid it." He didn't deny it. He let the silence settle between us because he understood I needed it. I walked toward the window and stared out at the street, where everything looked calm, ordinary, safe. While inside my house, the truth screamed under the floorboards. The distance between Jensen and me felt suddenly wide, filled with unspoken words and emotional debris. When I finally spoke again, my voice shook. "I don't know if I can trust you." Jensen came closer, but didn't reach for me. "Then let me earn it," he said. "But first, you need to stop Adrian. And I need to help you. You shouldn't do this alone." I wanted to push him away, to protect what little remained of my sanity, but something in his voice softened me. Despite my anger, I believed him. Not because I wanted to, but because he carried the kind of pain only truth can carve. The next morning, I tried to confront my father. I found him in the kitchen making coffee, humming lightly to himself as if the world wasn't slowly collapsing behind him. I stood across from him, rehearsing my words in my throat, trying to find the courage to speak. "Dad," I said carefully, "we need to talk about Adrian." He looked up, smiling slightly, unaware of the storm brewing. "What about him?" I told him everything, what I heard, what Jensen revealed, the past Adrian had tried to bury. But Dad's face shifted from concern to disbelief, then to something sharper. He shook his head and set the mug down. "Carver, you're letting your emotions cloud your judgment," he said, disappointed. "Adrian isn't the villain you're painting him to be." Hearing him say that hurt more than anything. My father believed a stranger over me, his own son. And it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because he was desperate to hold on to something that felt like stability. Losing Mom had shattered him. The idea of losing someone again terrified him. I could see it in his eyes. "No," I said softly, "I'm not wrong." But he walked away, leaving me alone with the bitter truth that sometimes love blinds people so completely that they can't recognize danger even when it stands in front of them. That night, after hours of pacing and replaying Dad's reaction, something hardened inside me. If he wouldn't protect himself, then I had to protect him. I wouldn't let Adrian destroy what little was left of our family. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a purpose. I texted Jensen with a single message: "We're going to expose Adrian tomorrow." And when Jensen replied, "I'm with you," a fragile thread connected us again, thin but unbroken. Behind me, the house was quiet, unaware of what was coming. Ahead of me, the truth waited like a rising storm. I didn't know how everything would unfold, but I knew this. Betrayal had already carved its place in our story. Now it was time for revenge to write the next chapter. I woke before sunrise, the kind of waking where your lungs feel too tight for the truth you're about to face. The plan Jensen and I had pieced together over restless nights felt both fragile and unstoppable, like a thin bridge over a deep drop. Yet I walked across it because there was no other way left. My dad deserved the truth, even if it shattered him. I kept replaying the recordings we gathered, Adrian's voice dripping with greed and certainty. And every time I heard it, the anger inside me sharpened into something steadier than emotion. It became purpose. Jensen arrived at my house just as I finished rehearsing what I would say. He looked tense, like he'd barely slept too, but when his eyes met mine, something softened. We didn't speak at first. We didn't need to. Everything between us, the hurt, the fear, the remnants of distrust, was still there, but now it was covered by something stronger. Survival, maybe, or loyalty, or that fragile, unspoken feeling neither of us dared to name yet. "Ready?" he finally asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, though my voice trembled at the edges. We walked inside, and a familiar scent of brewed coffee lingered. Dad was seated at the dining table, flipping through some documents, unaware of the storm seconds away from hitting him. Adrian stood near him, leaning casually against the counter like he already owned the place. His eyes snapped to me the moment I entered, and something in his expression shifted. Wariness, calculation, maybe even recognition of the war he'd already lost and just didn't know yet. "Carver," Dad said, offering a small smile. "I'm glad you're up. We were just talking about—" "I need to show you something," I said, interrupting him with a firmness I had never used on him before. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "Maybe you should choose a better time." "No," I said sharply. "The time is now." Dad looked between us, confused, but he didn't interrupt again. I reached into my pocket and placed my phone on the table. My hands shook, but I forced myself to press play. Adrian's voice filled the room instantly, crystal clear. "Marshall, trust me. Once the contract is signed, we take the house, the accounts, everything." It was the kind of sentence you couldn't mistake for anything, but exactly what it was. Dad froze, his face draining of color. Adrian stepped forward quickly, desperate, words spilling out too fast. "Marshall, listen. This is taken out of context. Someone manipulated." Dad raised his hand, silencing him, and his eyes burned with something I had never seen in him before. Betrayal so raw it nearly dissolved the man he used to be. He replayed the recording twice, and each time his jaw tightened more. "You lied to me," Dad whispered. "This whole time you lied." Adrian tried again, reaching toward him, but Dad stepped back. "Get out of my house," he said, voice cracking. "Get out before I do something I regret." Adrian's mask fell instantly. The softness, the polished charm, gone. All that remained was bitter resentment as he glared at me, then Jensen, then Dad. "You're making a mistake," he spat. "No," I said, stepping forward. "The mistake was thinking you could destroy families and keep walking away untouched." He left without another word, his footsteps heavy with the weight of being exposed. When the door slammed shut, the house felt painfully silent. Dad sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. And for a moment, neither Jensen nor I knew what to do. I sat beside him slowly. "Dad, I tried to tell you earlier." He nodded, tears slipping through his fingers. I should have listened. I should have seen it. I just didn't want to be alone anymore. Hearing that broke something in me. All my resentment, all the anger I carried for years. It cracked open and poured out. I put my hand on his shoulder, and he leaned into me like he hadn't let himself do in years. "You're not alone," I said. "You have me. You always had me." He nodded, squeezing my hand, and for the first time in a long time, we let ourselves just be father and son without the walls we'd built between us. After Dad went upstairs to rest, I stepped outside, breathing in the cold morning air. Jensen followed me, standing close but not touching, like he wasn't sure if he should. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for waiting so long to tell you the truth. I didn't want to hurt you, but I ended up doing it anyway." I turned toward him. "You helped save my dad. You helped save my family. That means something." He exhaled softly, almost relieved, but still unsure. "I came here for revenge," he admitted. "But somewhere along the way, you became the reason I stayed." Those words hit deeper than I expected. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us, and for a moment, we just stood there, breathing the same air, sharing the same wound that had somehow brought us together. "I'm not sure what happens next," I said honestly, "but I want you in my life. Not because of what we just went through, but because of who you've been to me." He finally smiled, that soft, warm smile that always made something shift inside me. "I want that too," he said, voice low. We didn't rush the moment. We didn't need to. Just being there. Two people who had been bruised by betrayal, yet still capable of choosing something honest. Felt like enough. When I walked back in the house later, I saw Dad standing by the window, watching the driveway where Adrian had just stormed off hours earlier. He looked tired, but there was something new in his eyes, a fragile kind of hope. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "I will be." And Carver, thank you for saving me from something I didn't see coming. I walked over and stood beside him. Outside, the morning light stretched across the neighborhood, quiet and warm. I realized then that everything had changed, not because of Dad's surprise, but because the truth had finally been forced into the open. Sometimes it takes being broken to understand what needs to be rebuilt. And as I stood beside my dad, and with Jensen waiting on the porch behind us, I felt a strange, powerful certainty settle inside me. The surprise my dad had brought into our lives had nearly destroyed us. But in the end, it brought out something stronger, something honest, something worth rebuilding. And maybe, just maybe, it brought me a kind of love I never expected to find.